I want to wrap up these devotionals on Philippians with one of the most well-loved and most comforting passages in the entire Bible. It comes from the final chapter of Philippians and speaks of the peace which passes all understanding. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas. And this is your daily devotional for Saturday, September 20th, 2025. As I wrap up our walk through Philippians, let me just review quickly where we've been. Last week, I followed the epistle selections in the daily lectionary for the week, all of which were from Philippians, and walked through it from beginning to end. The only problem was that I couldn't touch on everything and had to skip some important passages. So this week I've gone back and tried to fill in some of the gaps, one of which is in today's reading. But instead of reading only one single verse, I want to read what comes before it as a way not only of placing it in context, which is always important for understanding, but of understanding the practical importance of the peace it talks about. So even a cursory scan of Paul's letters, including this letter to the Philippians, reveals that Paul was constantly dealing with threats to the life of the church. Sometimes the threats came in the form of itinerant preachers teaching false doctrine. Sometimes the threats came in the form of hostility to the church from outsiders. But sometimes the threats came from conflicts among the members of the church itself. From the context of this particular letter, there was a conflict between two women in the church. What this conflict was, we do not know. Paul simply assumes his readers would have known. The women and their conflict were obviously well known to his readers. It could have been a disagreement about theology and what the church should believe. Or it could have been a petty disagreement about nothing we would consider important. Maybe one of the women liked to set up the worship space one way, and the other woman liked to set it up differently. Either way, their disagreement and estrangement Paul evidently regarded as a threat to the church itself. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that when Paul wrote letters to particular churches, he fully expected that his letter would be read aloud to the whole congregation, probably during a service of worship. Bear that in mind as I read the first part of this passage. I urge Euodia and I urge Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. Yes, and I ask you also, my loyal companion, help these women, for they have struggled beside me in the work of the gospel, together with Clement and the rest of my co-workers, whose names are in the book of life. Ouch! If I were Euodia or Syntyche, I would be mortified to hear my name read aloud in front of the whole congregation. I assume they were like most of us. They wouldn't want their dirty laundry aired out in such a public way, even if everybody already knew about it. What we most often do when we have conflicts in the church is we try our best to solve the conflict quietly, behind closed doors, so as not to embarrass anyone. Often the effect is simply to sweep things under the rug, to paper over differences, in order to maintain at least the appearance of unity. But that was not Paul's way of doing things. He was a firm believer in bringing conflict out into the open and dealing with it forthrightly and directly. So, having now thoroughly embarrassed Euodia and Syntyche by naming their conflict before the whole church, he utters words that we often quote completely apart from this context of these two women's petty conflict. He says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayers and supplications with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." What Paul does here is to place the conflict between these two women, leaders in the Philippian church, into context. And that context is the imminent return of Christ. Next to that, their conflict should become so insignificant as to enable the two of them to reconcile. Instead of fretting about some minor issue, they should be able to focus on the big picture. Doing so, thinks Paul, will replace their angst over whatever minor squabble they've been having with a sense of peace and calm because of the coming of Christ into the world. Peace, in this context, once again, implies the absence of conflict, but also much more. It implies that many of our conflicts are so minor and so petty in comparison with the coming of Christ as to be not worthy of our time and effort. It implies that the knowledge of Christ's imminent return can be a source of such internal peace as to enable us no longer to fret about our silly differences. Oh, that the church could hear this anew today. Now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.